It's an extraordinary fact that around 1 in 200 young American women believe they've become pregnant without ever having had sex. More than half of those say they've actually had a virgin birth.
I think that's ridiculous. I don't think it could possibly happen.
But do we really know for sure? In the wild, scientists have begun to document a strange phenomenon. Females previously thought to only sexually reproduce, cloning themselves.
You only need one female to start a colony. It's as if they've mated with themselves.
This is running to you. There he is, right there.
It raises the uncomfortable question that's bugged scientists for over a century. Why do males exist?
In this episode, we look at the evolutionary purpose of males and find out if we're in danger of losing them altogether.
There's a lot of excitement because high temperatures are converting the boys into girls.
For boa constrictors, it usually takes a mummy and a daddy snake to make a baby. But in 2011, evolutionary biologist Dr. Warren Booth stumbled on a surprise. He was asked by a breeder to do a paternity test on a litter of caramel boas, a rare and lucrative colour trait.
He had sent me some shed skins from the mother, from the offspring, and then from each of the potential fathers. And from shed skins, we can extract DNA.
Warren was floored by the result. The baby snakes had no father at all.
We found that the offspring only had the genetic contribution of the mother. The finding for me was pretty astonishing.
It's called Parthenogenesis, from the Greek word parthenos, meaning virgin, and genesis, meaning creation.
The general consensus is that virgin births among sexually reproducing animals like boa constrictors only happens in captivity, like for instance in zoos or aquaria, either from stress, long periods of isolation, or even ideal living conditions.
This extraordinary phenomenon has not just been recorded in captive snakes, but also in Komodo dragons, sharks, and even in turkeys. But never before had it been seen in wild vertebrates. Until just 3 years ago, when it was discovered in the US almost by accident.
Yeah, much bigger.
We started off with the idea that we were going to do a behavioral study with baby copperheads. And so we went to our Connecticut field site and collected a whole bunch of pregnant females, about 24 of them, brought them back to the lab. And basically for the first week or so, we were just on maternity watch. And the female started giving birth.
Its tail is moving.
After reading a paper of Warren's, Chuck began to suspect 1 or 2 of the litters could be the result of a virgin birth.
Often those litters are very small, typically just one offspring, and I sort of made a little bit of a connection, kind of a light bulb moment. And I got really excited, and I collected some samples and overnighted them up to Warren's lab.
Warren's DNA work revealed Chuck's suspicions were correct. An extraordinary case of wild parthenogenesis.
In fact, the first case of parthenogenesis in any wild mated vertebrate that we know about.
What happened was the snake had fused the genetic material from 2 of her egg cells, completing the full set of chromosomes and essentially mating with herself.
You're getting one set from the sex chromosome, the actual egg, the second set from the polar body, which are essentially identical.
A wild cottonmouth collected by another collaborator also was found to have parthenogenetic offspring.
We were astounded. I was working late in the lab that night and I immediately called my co-authors. What was interesting about the 2 populations that these snakes came from was that they had sex ratios of around 1 to 1. So for every female there was a male, and therefore there was no shortage of males to reproduce with that female.
The baby copperhead parthenogen has now matured and looks normal in every way.
We are, at the moment, pretty confident that it can reproduce.
This means a whole population could theoretically spring from just one female. Since the discovery, virgin births have also been discovered in wild small-toothed sawfish, with around 5% of offspring produced this way. How many more species could it now be happening in?
We're now reassessing multiple wild populations, and I think we're going to find it very commonly within birds, sharks, and the reptile group.
We already know it happens in some insects, but why is an unknown. It could be a lifesaver for species facing extinction, like the Lord Howe Island stick insect, which plummeted to just a handful of individuals following an invasion of black rats. Being able to produce loads of offspring without males may just have kept them hanging on. Thanks to an intensive breeding program at Melbourne Zoo, the population now numbers more than 11,000. Although virgin births in sexually reproducing animals might be rare, here in the outback, some species have done without any males at all for quite some time. One species of reptile has so captivated my guides that we've flown from 3 states and driven 6 hours just to see it. Our final destination, this old rubbish tip on Wirramina Station, South Australia.
Oh, this looks great.
Think you'll find them here?
Oh, yeah. Well, we've been here many times.
What we're looking for is a very special little gecko.
Yeah, the snakes.
Oh, it's a rabbit.
It's a rabbit.
Well, what?
Aside from housing the odd, unexpected bunny, these warm piles of tin sheeting are like high-rise apartments for reptiles.
This looks like a good spot.
Oh, there's one.
There's one. Here you go. Oh, I've got a little guy.
That was quick.
Little tiny fella. So he's about a year old.
Oh, sweet little thing.
Yeah.
So that's a bino-nosed gecko?
Oh, yeah. Well, I call it the garbage gecko for 2 reasons. One is you find them in garbage tips, but people thought they were pretty much rubbish animals, just so common.
But the bino-nosed gecko is anything but common. DNA analysis has shown that rubbish tips from here to Western Australia are crawling with an all-female species. Like the lady we've just found.
So this is a full clone of its mother?
Yeah, yeah. So the females just produce daughters, and produce daughters, and produce daughters, and they're genetically identical.
Unlike the snakes, these parthenogenetic lizards can only reproduce by cloning themselves. They double their chromosomal material before making their eggs, so they don't need fertilisation. And the girls are not just genetically identical, but incredibly successful, occupying a huge range across Australia.
There's quite a number of parthenogenetic lineages actually in the Australian desert that are very abundant and very common. There's some insects, there's a grasshopper and a stick insect. Tiny little skink that's evolved just the same way as the geckos. There's even a couple of plants that are very widespread common plants like the mulga tree.
Dr. Michael Carney has been trying to work out why the arid zone of Australia is a hotspot for all female species.
In the Northern Hemisphere, it tends to be where the glaciers were. In the Australian context, it seems to be in the harshest, most arid parts of the desert.
It's these places that have seen the greatest swings in climate through geological time.
What it seems happened is that you had these populations of the sexual species that were forced apart perhaps by climatic change and then brought back together, and when they met, they started interbreeding.
But because they'd been separated for so long, the populations had grown a bit different, kind of like a donkey and a horse. Their hybrid offspring, like the mule, couldn't sexually reproduce, but somehow gained the ability to clone itself.
Every single vertebrate we know that has completely given up on sex, bar one species, is a hybrid. So I think there's a real clue there about what's going on.
The amazing thing is, as far as stamina goes, this all-female form of binos outdoes the rest.
We went into the field and collected the 2 sexual species and brought them into the lab and then measured a number of physiological things. So we found that the parthenogens could walk for longer. They had a higher endurance than the sexual forms, and that's not unlike what you see in mules. So you end up often making hybrid crops or animals. They have greater performance.
It's called hybrid vigor, and the tough all-female geckos have it. In some regions, they've outperformed their sexually reproducing counterparts by 50%.
Now, this leaves us with a very uncomfortable question. If the female species outperforms all the others and can reproduce by herself, why do males exist in any species?
It's actually been a question that has puzzled evolutionary biologists for a long time.
Well, sex is just grossly inefficient. You've got to find a mate, you've got to defend a mate or maintain a partnership long enough to reproduce. That's risky in terms of exposure to predators, use of energy and resources. It's grossly inefficient in terms of population growth. You're much better off to have the entire population be female, churning out babies, than to have half the individuals male and unable to produce offspring. It's a whole range of reasons why sex is really a bad idea.
Of course, it exists for a very good reason. And if you look closely at the female species of Binos gecko, you'll cop an eyeful of the value of males.
So you can see this little gecko's got these little red dots around underneath its eye.
Oh, yeah.
You see those?
Yeah. What are they?
No, they're little parasites called mites. They're red because of the blood they're sucking.
The red mites increase water loss, something pretty undesirable in the desert.
And these we only see on the parthenogenetic animals, not the sexual ones, even if they're in exactly the same place, same piece of tin, sometimes in big numbers.
The mites don't exist on the sexually reproducing species because they have males. So there it is. Sex, although messy, complicated, time-consuming and a waste of resources, gives us a wonderful opportunity to shuffle genes. It produces the fantastic variations that allow us not just to live in different environments, but also to stay one step ahead of the parasites and predators trying to find chinks in our genetic armour.
Parasites themselves evolved all sorts of mechanisms to evade a particular combination of genes in one generation. But if you shuffle those genes between generations, then the parasites have to co-evolve or keep up with that arms race.
That's something an all-female species just can't do.
If the parasites have adapted to the mother, they're automatically adapted to the daughter.
It could explain why parthenogenetic species aren't particularly long-lived.
Every example we look at, they're short-lived and on an evolutionary timescale.
For other species that only occasionally have virgin births through fusing their own genetic material, it's even worse.
That is effectively like severe inbreeding. So you lose a lot of diversity and you expose those bad genes that are normally covered by a spare copy.
So although one female copperhead snake can theoretically start a whole population, their genetic diversity, health and survival rates will be extremely poor. So we know that virgin births are not ideal and can have severe consequences. But there's still one burning question left.
In the absence of divine intervention, could us humans possibly conceive and give birth without the help of a male?
A Christmas special of the British Medical Journal reported that nearly 1 in every 200 young women in America believe they've had a virgin birth. Could that actually be possible?
Well, it sounds like nonsense to me.
Where's your daddy?
Mammals really can't do that because we've got about 30 genes that have to come through the male line. They have to come in sperm or they're not active, and the embryo can't develop without those genes.
Mammals, like us humans, have an inbuilt balancing act in our maternal and paternal DNA.
A lot of the genes that are active only when they come through the male, they're genes that will make the baby bigger and stronger and more successful at the expense of the female.
Turning into a great big girl already, aren't you?
The mother favours tiny offspring for ease of delivery and feeding. To make sure neither dominates, genes on both sides must be silenced or activated for the embryo to develop properly. But if the intended active copy is missing, you end up with big problems.
If the maternal copy is missing, then you get one syndrome, and if the paternal copy is missing, you get a different syndrome.
We play Play-Doh?
Jake has Angelman Syndrome. He's missing one of his mother's crucial genes. The result has been devastating for Jake's development.
Yeah, that's Pony. Pony. So he's non-verbal. He has epilepsy. Pressing down. He is intellectually delayed. Good boy. Now he has worked out ways to communicate, so he can actually express his frustration.
And in what sort of things does he get frustrated about?
He likes to eat all day long, and he does eat a lot. I find he doesn't quite know when to stop. I have to take something off him. Banana bread.
Despite difficulties communicating, Jake, like many with Angelman syndrome, has a generally happy nature.
When he sees somebody for the first time or he hears a funny noise, he just bursts into laughter and he thinks it's hilarious. The most simplest things are so funny, which is one of the nice positive things.
Prader-Willi Syndrome occurs most commonly when the active father's genes are altered or deleted on the same chromosome.
The children, to begin with, feed very poorly, and then for some reason that I don't think anybody understands, they seem to overcompensate for that and become quite obese.
Although they don't have the same communication challenges, they often don't achieve normal growth and can suffer sleep and behavioural problems. All from the alteration of just a few paternal genes. Having none at all, for us mammals, is incompatible with life.
Either way, either the mother's genes or the father's genes, they do have to work together to make a viable embryo.
But what about all those women in the journal who claim they had a virgin birth? It turns out the phenomenon was more common among women who had signed chastity pledges, or whose parents had lower levels of communication with their children about sex or birth control. The authors concluded the results revealed more about the dangers of self-reporting than any miracles of conception. Although we found a good reason for males to exist, it's time to ponder something even more baffling. What makes creatures of the world male and female in the first place? And what if all that were to change?
So I think we sort of grown up to believe that all animals are like us, but that's really not the case at all. In fact, mammals are fairly unique in having an X and a Y chromosome.
In humans, if the Y chromosome is passed on from the father, a boy will be born. But if an X is passed down from dad instead, it's a girl. In other animals, like fish for instance, it's not nearly so simple.
A lot of these systems work not in having a gene that makes you male or makes you female. So there's some fish that can actually change sex. If they find they're the biggest fish around, they can change from females to males.
One of these is the beautiful blue groper. If the large dominant male dies, the biggest female in the area will grow, change colour and sex, and become the dominant male. These baby Philippines crocodiles are calling to each other as they hatch. Their sex is determined by temperature. Any eggs incubated at 33 degrees will hatch as male crocodiles. If you happen to be a Melbourne zookeeper breeding these endangered species, you can literally cook yourself a bloke.
In fact, it's always an optimum. So you get 100% males at an optimal temperature, and on either side of that optimum, you get females. And so it seems like males are a bit fussy. They need to be just at the right set of temperatures.
Fussy or not, many reptiles, like turtles, have their sex determined by temperature. While other animals are more like us, they're born male or female depending on which sex chromosomes they receive. These systems were thought to be mutually exclusive. You either have one or the other. And this is where it starts to get really bizarre. Lizards, as we know, like it hot. But the central bearded dragon is feeling the heat perhaps a little too much.
Got him? Good on you.
This large and somewhat evasive reptile is one of those whose sex is determined by genes.
There he is. Go on ya.
Where do I go?
Go in front. Oh, what a beauty.
What a catch!
And you can tell he's a male because of the size of the head.
Yep.
But also because he's got little lumps there that hold the hemipenes. There you go. There you are.
Oh, wow.
Look at that.
But instead of X and Y chromosomes like us humans, these lizards have sex genes like birds, a Z and a W.
In this species, the males become males because they've got ZZ chromosomes, and the females normally become females because they've got ZW chromosomes.
At least that's what everyone thought, until back at Canberra University labs, the research team began turning up the heat.
What we did was we incubated the eggs at different temperatures and looked at the sex ratio of the offspring that was produced, and we found that when we increased the temperatures to up between 34 and 36 degrees, we started to get more females than we expected.
Dr. Claire Holloley found that higher temperatures could override the genetic signal. And ZZ boys began to physically develop into females in the egg.
Once you hit about 35 degrees Celsius, then that's when the population will be producing 100% females. They look, act, reproduce like girls. So if you went out and looked at one, it would look all the world like a girl, but secretly its chromosomes are actually male.
It was really interesting because what it meant was that the potential was there for the ZZ females, the sex-reversed ones, to mate with ordinary ZZ males and then produce offspring by jettisoning the W chromosome. So you're getting males and females without the W chromosome. So it's as astonishing as humans producing boys without a Y chromosome.
But the big question was, could sex reversal happen outside the lab if temperatures got high enough?
Sorry. Where we were studying them in the wild in Western Queensland, it's actually the very area in Australia that's had the most change of temperature in the last 40 years. It's been getting hotter. The astonishing thing is that when we catch a female, we don't know whether it's a normal ZW female or whether it's a sex-reversed ZZ female.
So now you take a blood sample, do you?
That's right.
But in the 12 years they've been studying the lizards, Arthur and Steve have collected blood samples from each one.
The obvious thing was to go back to all the samples from the wild and see whether any of the females were actually ZZ individuals. And lo and behold, we found that it was occurring in the wild, and that's really new.
Basically what we've shown is that the bearded dragon can go from using sex chromosomes to, in one generation, losing their W chromosome, and temperature becomes the primary cue.
The difference between the offspring being 100% male and 100% female is often only about a degree or half a degree either way. And so they appear to be extraordinarily vulnerable to a shifting climate.
What this means in a hot, arid region like Yulo is quite disturbing. Because males born from sex-reversed females are more likely to sex-reverse themselves, it means more and more females will be born.
65108.
Although their sample sizes have been small, there's already an indication that the trend towards sex-reversed females has begun.
In fact, we have found that it is getting more frequent. It went from about 11% to about 20% sex reversal.
It's never been seen before in any species in the wild.
That's not critical because you can do with fewer and fewer males and still the females can all reproduce. But ultimately, you will end up producing all females and then that'll be catastrophic and the population will crash and potentially become locally extinct. It's only springtime now and it's already 37 degrees.
Yeah, and this is nesting time, isn't it?
It is nesting time. We expect that if you examine more species, you'll find many more instances of sex reversal with temperature. May as well put him here, I think. So many more species than previously thought could be vulnerable to shifts in climate as a consequence of sex ratio distortion.
See you, big boy.
Although they might survive well in the short term, lowering the ratio of males isn't desirable. It was research from the University of East Anglia in the UK that demonstrated just how important it is to have many males in a population. They bred flower beetles in different ratios, some with 9 males for every female, right down to groups where the ladies only had one option. After 7 years, the scientists inbred the populations. Those that had a previously high level of competition between males remained healthy, but the low sexual selection group declined rapidly in health and went extinct by the 10th generation. What all these studies show is a life without males is no life at all.
Yeah, that's right. Males are useful in the end.
I'd love to think so. It's very important to me personally.